This is Richie Incognito of the Buffalo Bills. You're listening to Locked On Bills, presented by Cover One.
All right, everybody, welcome into another edition of Locked On Bills. Nate Geary, Dan Lavoie here with you, bringing you, of course, our scouting report edition of Locked On Bills. This week we are scouting the Miami Dolphins. Dan and I were just speaking before we came on. What an interesting team the Dolphins are. We'll start, obviously, like we do every week, Dan, with the offensive side of the ball. But what an interesting team. We were talking about this is a team that hasn't had a bye week yet this year, obviously, with the hurricane earlier in the year. That first game of the year was really their bye week. They're playing 16 straight football games. The first time since they initiated bye weeks that a team is going to have to play 16 straight weeks. However, this is a team that is sort of getting healthy right now, meaning I don't know that the bye weeks, the no bye week sort of to break up their season is really going to matter very much.
Yeah, this is, you wonder sometimes how beneficial is that bye. On the one hand, it gives you the opportunity to rest some players and maybe get a little bit of extra planning before a big game. But on the other hand, there's something to be said for just continuing that rhythm of playing every single week and gelling as a team. And so the Dolphins have, after starting out with a solid first few weeks and then running through a very poor stretch, they've really put it together, dominating the Denver Broncos and then knocking off the New England Patriots on Monday Night Football this past week. So they may be hitting their stride at the right time.
Yeah, the domination of that Denver Broncos team isn't as really impressive as the dismantling of the New England Patriots on Monday Night Football on the national stage. I thought that was obviously the game of the week, considering that there wasn't that other very many competitive games other than the Eagles and Rams. But it was interesting for me anyways to watch Jake Cutler really kind of outduel Tom Brady on Monday night. That was something to see.
Yeah, definitely. It felt a little bit more like a callback to the beginning of the year when the Patriots defense was really struggling and the Dolphins were looking more like a competent all-around team. So, yeah, this whole thing is a cycle, apparently.
Yep, it's the battle of attrition, but let's head into the offense for the Miami Dolphins, and let's start at the quarterback position with who we know will be in this week. That's Jake Cutler, coming off the tremendous performance against a really banged-up New England Patriots defense. No Kyle Van Noy. They just had zero pass rushing ability against Jake Cutler. He carved up the Patriots defense a lot better than Tyrod Taylor did just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difference between a player like Taylor and a player like Cutler is Cutler has all this arm talent, and he's not afraid to just throw a ball out there and say, yeah, go get it. I gave it to you. He takes chances. He fits it into tight windows, and the Patriots defenders just were not able to confuse him and clog up those lanes because at times he just didn't care.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably what we know about Jay Cutler at this point. He is a willing, he's going to throw the football in coverage. He's going to turn the ball over. He's going to fumble the ball. He really managed to not turn the ball over against the defense. But other than that Bills game, I mean, there's a couple instances of the Patriots defense really sort of playing much better than their talent suggests. But for the most part, they've been sort of the same team all year with a couple of good performances sprinkled in. They really looked out of place. And Jay Cutler really, which I thought was interesting, took advantage of that secondary, and so did that running game. What did you think, though, overall, in terms of what you saw against the Patriots that Jay Cutler did that you think might be, something they might try against the Bills this week in the cold, which will be a difficult task for a Miami Dolphins team. It always is.
Yeah, well, I think that is actually the biggest question here is, will the Dolphins offense coming into Buffalo from Miami, will they be able to play this same style that they wanted to when they're up in what looks like there will be a more lake effect snow coming in? Will they be able to run that sort of an offense again? And I'm not so sure. What did you think, Nate?
Yeah, I thought that a couple of times, and Sean McDermott mentioned it about, Cutler's throwing ability. Cutler's always, to me, I think he always struggled in those cold weather games. And I think now that he's in Miami, older in his career, I'm not convinced that the style of play they played against the Patriots could be something they duplicate this week, especially in the cold. If it's snowing, I just don't. There was a lot of moving. Specifically that Landry touchdown, the first Landry touchdown where they moved Cutler outside the pocket. I would hope that this week they don't let Cutler. I think the way you beat Cutler is you beat him from inside the pocket. And, I thought the Patriots did a poor job of letting him get outside contained, letting him get outside sort of the structure of the offense.
Definitely. I'd also add that one mismatch that the Dolphins love to take advantage of, and that starts to get towards the skill position players, is they love Jarvis Landry working in the slot, trying to get him motioned out, matched up onto a linebacker. If we were talking about this game 1 week or 2 weeks ago, I would say that this is a big, dangerous area for the Bills because of who would have been matched up against him. With the recent news that Matt Milano is now the new starter at weak side linebacker, that's not as scary of a proposition anymore. He's a more athletic player that can match up against Landry.
Yeah, the kid can cover. And I mean, you go back to the Saints game, you go back to the games before that, and you talk about these good offenses that were, and it seemed like every week it was their top receiver match up against Ramon Humber, and everyone's like, oh man, what is going on? Luckily, I don't think we're going to have to worry about that moving forward. Let's talk about the running back position, Dan. In a position, obviously, this team trades away Jay Ajayi in what many thought was a head-scratching move. He was your best running back. Without question on the roster, but a guy that came off a really great season last year, 3 games of 200-plus yards. They turned now to Damian Williams and Kenyon Drake, most recently Kenyon Drake 2 nights ago on Monday night against the Patriots, over 190 yards of total offense. Thoughts on Drake and this backfield as a whole without maybe their most talented player in Jay Ajayi?
Yeah, this is really interesting because Drake was a total non-factor for the first half of the season. He had 10 carries for, not even 25 yards. But he started to kind of unlock his potential once they traded Ajayi. They filled him in for, half dozen carries here or there. And he's been breaking some long runs. He had a 35-yard run, 27. And then obviously, he has the breakaway speed. He was always kind of the change of pace back at Alabama when you had, Derrick Henry.
That backfield was ridiculous. That 2013 backfield was unbelievable.
And I heard that the name escapes me now. Alvin Kamara also.
Yeah,
remember that backfield.
He was in that backfield in 2013 before he transferred. Yeah, so, unbelievable. Him, Derrick Henry,
TJ Yeldon.
Yeah, that backfield is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, so Drake's role was as kind of the big play change-up guy who could receive out of the backfield or just break it open towards the sidelines. And, true to form, that's what he's done. And they've counted on him for the past 2 weeks with Damian Williams being injured to open up their offense, and he's been delivering. Williams has had kind of a down year, I guess. He's been dealing with injuries. He's missed the past 2 weeks. He didn't practice on Wednesday, so he's questionable to play against the Bills. But from the Dolphins' standpoint, that's probably better for them based on how Drake has looked.
Aaron Rodgers is back, and the NFL is in trouble. Hi, this is Peter Bukowski, host of Locked on Packers. Join us this week as we dive into the return of one of the game's greatest players as Green Bay sets its sights on the playoffs and tries to shake up the race in the NFC. We'll look at how the Packers can use what they learned with Brett Hundley to make Rodgers even more dynamic this week against Carolina and every game moving forward. Find all of our shows on iTunes and at LockedOnPackers.com.
Biggest stories, local experts, the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yeah, I think this gives him an opportunity to really take the reins as the number one back. And as we mentioned, comes from Alabama in a system that really obviously turns out great running backs every year. Let's go to their pass catchers because this is a big group. This is an offense that doesn't utilize the fullback really at all. Marquise Gray is sort of their H-back of sorts, the guy that's going to be out of the backfield. They don't really run a fullback. So 3 wide receivers sets a lot. You're going to see Kenny Stills, Jarvis Landry, and Devontae Parker out in the field most plays. That's their sort of bread and butter. 3 wide receiver, one receiver. 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and a running back look. That's really their bread and butter. And I look at this group as a very dynamic group of receivers. You got Kenny Stills, who gives you sort of that lightning in a bottle, that go downfield and go get it sort of guy. Devontae Parker, who really does all of it. He can play underneath, he can play intermediate, and he can be the guy that's over the top. And Jarvis Landry, who's obviously one of the best underneath artists in the league. How do you defend this trio of receivers that has really turned into a nice group? And that's not even to mention Jakeem Grant, who has really turned into a nice player for them, as well as sort of a fourth or fifth guy.
Yeah, and we have to throw Julius Thomas in there.
Sure, yeah.
Who, like, he's not up to his standards that he set a few years back when he was like a number one target, but he's still a solid, talented player. I think the thing that the Bills are going to want to try to do this week is acknowledge that each of the talented receivers that Miami has kind of fits into a niche, and they want to contain him within that zone. So Landry, he is definitely your between the numbers, short pattern kind of guy. Miami just loves to get him on basically an extended handoff and let him work, break tackles, and move in space. So the Bills' zone defense, if they have their healthy players, they can tackle in space. I think that they can do a decent job of containing Landry, and it's just all about discipline near the line of scrimmage and near the first down marker. Can they really track his routes, know where he's going, and converge on him in a hurry? With Kenny Stills, yeah, go ahead.
That and make the tackle when the first guy gets there, because especially against Landry, John Gruden on Monday night, they're talking about how powerful Landry is, even though he's smaller. I don't necessarily think he's a powerful guy, but I think he's just a slippery guy. He's the kind of guy that can break off the first tackle, but he's also the guy, and so is Kenny Stills, the kind of guy that it might catch it at or around the first down marker, and the kind of guy that would backtrack to try to get bigger yards. So it's really important against these wide receivers to be physical with them at the line of scrimmage first and foremost, but finish through when you're tackling them, because I think if you can play physical with them, they sort of shut down. They're not an overly physical group of receivers.
Yeah, that's right. And along with that is the gap discipline. If the Bills they've done this sort of thing before. If they can find a receiver who likes to gamble to try to find some extra room to work, play good discipline, converge on the guy, make him try to backtrack and get a few extra yards by going another direction. Before long, you're tackling him for a loss. So it's that kind of that's the sort of thing that Sean McDermott's defense can do. So that part bodes well. In a similar vein, you got Kenny Stills. He can be an outstanding deep threat. Adjusts very well to the football, tracks the ball in space very well. I'm interested to see how much the Bills like to put a safety over the top of him, or how many times they're going to just trust their outside cornerbacks, Gaines and White, to just be one-on-one.
Yeah, they haven't really shown a tendency to do that a lot. So I think they're going to stick with their zone coverage against these wide receivers. And now that you have Matt Milano in there, I think that I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I think it's an important aspect for a team like Miami, who utilizes that 3-and-1 set that, isn't necessarily the bread and butter of every team in this league. You do have a lot of teams who are using 2 and 3 tight ends. We're utilizing that fullback, utilizing 2 running backs. This is a team that sort of gets away from that. This is a team that likes to have their 3 wide receivers, because they are all very good. They're all very talented in their own way. For the sake of the offense too, I mean, this has been a unit that has started to come together the past few weeks, and it's because of the unit up front. Their front 5 has started to play like a unit that I think they thought that they were going to get from the beginning. But this is a unit, as we mentioned too before we got on, and it's really filled with a lot of tackles. Mike Pouncey, the center, to me is the class of that line. Laramie Tunsil on the left side, another nice left tackle in the league, a young left tackle. Obviously, they expended that first-round pick on him a few years back, but this is an offensive line that's very, very mobile. It's a positive for them, but they can get overpowered sometimes, and you've seen that up the middle. I just don't think the Bills have the defensive line to overpower anybody, much less a smaller, more athletic unit like Miami's.
Definitely. I think the big question here is going to be how healthy the Dolphins are up front. Coming into Wednesday's practice, starting right guard Jermon Bushrod, he missed practice, as well as Pouncey. So Bushrod actually missed the Monday Night Football game, so we'll see. He's probably the least likely to play of those two, but just having those players available is going to be helpful for Miami. If not, the Bills might be able to capitalize. But I have to agree, now that they've kind of ditched the Billy Turner experiment, moved Tunsil back out to his natural position, that it started to come together for them, and that's helping.
All right, so before we get into the defense, let's talk a little bit about our friends over at Draft. Fantasy football fans, listen up. It's not too late. Join the over 500,000 people, that's right, that have already downloaded Draft this season. You get to play in a real live snake draft, which is obviously some of the best parts about fantasy football. But you're in and under 5 minutes. You're in and out in 5 minutes, which is great. And they only last 1 week, so you do this every week. And it's a pretty interesting league. So if you go there and check it out right now, of course, it's Draft. You can download the app. The best part, of course, is the cold hard cash, which is the best payout of all these daily fantasy sites is, winning some money for doing it. So all new players are going to get a free entry into the real money draft when you make your first deposit. So you just got to use the promo code Locked On NFL. It's LONFL. That's right. If you use that, you'll be able to get into this entry. So make sure you use the promo code LONFL. That's Locked On NFL. And I believe they're even putting a certain amount of listeners a money back guarantee up to $100. So head to, of course, to Draft to check that out now and use the promo code LONFL. That's for Locked On NFL. All right, Dan. So let's move to the defensive side of the ball. What an interesting unit that's sort of coming together at a weird time. And usually we start up front. I think that's the easy place to start. But let's start in the secondary because it's really starting to come together for Miami, specifically Xavier Howard, who was on display on Monday night. 2 interceptions at Tom Brady. One of the more remarkable interceptions I've seen, his second one, where he just tracked the receiver back and made an incredible catch over his head or over his shoulder. Let's start with the corners because I think the safeties are a whole other animal in themselves. And then let's start with the cornerback position, Xavier Howard, and their nickel back as well, Alterin Werner.
Yeah, so Howard is a very interesting player. He came out from Baylor last year and was seen as kind of a project player as a rookie. So he only started about half the season for Miami, made a few rookie mistakes, was generally, not especially valuable. This year he started every game for them, and he's arguably their top cornerback, just period. He's played very well, gets his hands on a lot of passes these days. He has the size to compete against those bigger physical receivers. So I think the Dolphins like his chances against Kelvin Benjamin if Benjamin's going to play. So yeah, he's been a revelation for them in his second season.
Yeah, and obviously what we were going to talk about is the safety position, and I think the easy guy to talk about is Rashad Jones. He's one of those premier safeties in the league, but TJ McDonald, as of late, talk about an addition. This is a guy that was suspended for the first 6 or 8 games. I can't remember which one it was, but he was suspended for the first half of the season. I believe it was for PEDs, and he's back, and he's the guy that came out of USC, played a few years in LA, before that St. Louis. But this guy is one of the hardest hitting. He's a large size safety, a great box defender. Their 1-2 punch at safety has really materialized over, especially since McDonald came back from suspension.
Yeah, this has been another example of that midseason transformation that the Dolphins went under around week 9 or 10. So McDonald went unsigned through most of the offseason because it turned out he had that violation that caused him to miss half the season. So he got picked up by the Dolphins. He's been playing since week 10. And in that time, 30 tackles, has an interception. But more than that, he's just a tone setter for them. Yep. And as you said, it's getting defenses or getting the offenses to have to adjust to a new presence like that in the secondary is not easy. Let alone when he's coming in with no tape on him for that scheme. So he's been a game changer for them.
Yeah, no question. And let's move to the linebacker position, Dan, because this is another unit that I think has come together nicely, and I think it starts and finishes with Kiko Alonso. Lawrence Timmons is a name in that linebacking room, but he's really, as of late, been I don't want to say phased out, but he's not playing as big of a part in this this defense for Miami. Lawrence Timmons, he comes over from Pittsburgh. He is a pretty darn good linebacker in this league, but I just think that his inability to cover has really hurt this defense. They've gone more nickel and try to stay away from Timmons on the field. But as I mentioned, Kiko Alonso's had a really pretty nice season.
Yeah, the Dolphins definitely have a preference for 1 or 2 linebackers as kind of their base defense. They like to bring in the nickel cornerback Bobby McCain or Cordrea Tankersley as kind of their third DB. But Kiko Alonso, he's been the leader on this defensive linebacking core for a little while now. Bills fans obviously very familiar with him. He's the similar kind of player that they know him to be. He can make crazy athletic looking plays. But at the same time, he struggles to take on blockers. He can overrun the play. He makes some mistakes, but he's also a playmaker.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that is a classic example of what a coach says is when you make a mistake, make it full speed. And Alonso is the living example of that, a guy that will overrun a lot of plays. He'll make a couple of great wild plays that stand out on film, but overall he lacks consistency against power run games. And now against the Bills this week, I think this defense as a whole, this Miami Dolphins season, has done a nice job against the Bills run game. Especially last year. So I expect similar success defensively for Miami. And then obviously it starts with the unit up front, anchored by maybe one of the more polarizing players in the league in Ndamukong Suh. Obviously they pay all that money to bring him over from Detroit. He still is sort of that dirty player that he's always been, but this is also a team now that has dynamic pass rushers. We've always known about the Cameron Wakes. This is a guy that's been doing it for a few years now, but Andre Branch has added a really nice pass rushing element to this defense. Talk a little bit about this front four and how dynamic it's been, especially as of late.
Yeah, so the Dolphins have one of the larger investments in terms of edge rushers and defensive line money that you'll see in this league. Obviously, Suh is the biggest guy out there, the big money maker, but they've invested both low and high draft picks in this. So you've got Jordan Phillips from Oklahoma was drafted a few years ago in the second round. He's been a rotational nose tackle / defensive end for them. They also added Devon Godshaw from LSU as he's their late round nose tackle that they like to bring in as well. But there's just Suh as the collapser, devastating force up the middle is still just fine at 30 years old. And at 35 years old, Cameron Wake still one of the best sack artists in the league. He just gets the job done. Branch, you mentioned him. He has had kind of a average career working with the Jaguars. He's never really been a premier sack artist, but as a complementary piece to this Miami defensive line, he absolutely gets the job done. He can set the edge, contain. Yeah. Yeah,
and the one thing I will say, though, and I'm glad you talked about the contain right before I cut you off, but the interesting thing is I do think this team is weak to the perimeter. Both guys are really, especially on Cameron Wake's side. Cameron Wake is a premier pass rusher in this league. But in terms of when you look at a guy like Shaq Lawson, who before his injury didn't bring you that pass rushing element, but he brought you that anchoring element meaning that a lot of, especially perimeter run games, those outside zone run games, have a difficult time getting outside of Shaq. And the one thing I think about this defense is I do think there is some opportunity to get outside. And the one thing I worry about is, do they have the ability to get the ball out to the perimeter quickly? Because the one thing that I have seen this offense do and make a conscious effort of is make those little designed quick pitches out to LaShawn McCoy. It's essentially an extended run play, but I don't think those plays are developing fast enough. The key to me this week is how they can get LaShawn McCoy outside the numbers the quickest, because I think if they can, they could take advantage of this Miami Dolphins defense.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think this offense goes through McCoy this week. I mean, every week it does, but for sure this week, I think getting that outside zone game running. I also think that having some of these power looks where they pull a guard, have him come up and meet Alonso in the hole will be absolutely crucial for them. If they can start breaking some up the middle as well, get a multifaceted running game going, and then that opens up the play action. And whether it's Taylor or Peterman, whoever's under center for them on Sunday, they can get those bootlegs out and really start. And that's what I think the Patriots were missing when they were going up against the Dolphins, was they don't have that escapability, that mobility. And when Brady was getting pressured, he wasn't able to adjust. I think whether it's Taylor or Peterman, the Bills have enough of that improv element to their offense that they might be able to overcome that.
Yeah, and It's interesting because, this is the first time that Tyrod's going to play against Miami. Well, we think Tyrod's playing anyways, since his game last year, his Week 16 match against Miami, which maybe you could talk about as the best game of his career as a Bill. I talked about today on Twitter a lot about Sam Bradford and wanting to bring another sort of veteran-type quarterback in here in 2018. And I know that's fast-forwarding things a little bit, but my thought is this is the sort of game that you need a quarterback to be able to throw for 300 yards. You need a quarterback that can beat a defense through the air when they're all selling out for the run. And everybody wants to point to the total yardage situation with Taylor, opposed to Taylor's total yardage is very similar to Sam Bradford's total passing output. But, I'm in the camp that sometimes passing yards are more valuable to me in a quarterback than running yards. And this week, I think it's more important than any, considering the importance of winning this football game, to have your passing offense show up, but be a highlight of your offense. That if you can for 1 week give LaShawn McCoy an opportunity to go up against 6-man, 7-man boxes, opposed to the 7 and 8 and 9-man boxes he sees on a week in to week out basis, this is the game that I think maybe you have to start to take advantage of a pass game. Otherwise, I just don't know that you can win 2, or in most cases, I think you do need to get 3 wins out of these last 3. I don't know that it's viable, but a pass game has got to come around if they are going to get the necessary wins to get in.
Definitely. You see this, we've seen it for about 3 seasons now. Taylor has 1, maybe 2 games a year where he just looks like somebody injected ice into his veins, and he doesn't care about the pass rush. He stands tall in the pocket. He steps up, delivers. He's throwing for 8 yards per attempt, and the coaches don't know what to do because he never does this. But so he'll only throw 25 times and gets close to 300 yards. And he had one of those games against the Dolphins last year. So this is what we need to see from Taylor. At this point, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. He's done with the Bills after this season. He's playing for his new contract now. So will he show up? Will that Taylor show up this week? I think everyone is hoping that that's going to be the case. And the luck that the Bills do have is that this Dolphins team has not been very dominant at all during this season. They've only had a single win that was more than a single score of a differential. So they've had a 19-17 win. They've had 16-10, 20-17. So this is a team that does not win games by a very large margin. So they're not especially tough to beat. Yeah. So I think that this is a team that the Bills match well up against. The Bills are used to playing close games. The Bills are used to winning close games. They're used to keeping the score low. And so I think that on paper, it may look like the Dolphins kind of have the edge here, but this is at home. It's in the Bills' backyard. It's going to be a snowy day. I think that the Bills can win this one, and I think they'll keep their playoff hopes alive at least one more week. Something like a 27-20 type of win over the Dolphins is my guess.
Matt, that's kind of where I am at too. My thought for this game is a Bills win. I think they do win this one at home. The last home game of the year. I think it's important for this group to go out on a positive note, leaving Buffalo going into the 2 most important away games that I can really remember. If they can win this game, I think it's important for them to get this one, get to 2 games over 500. I like something along the lines of 20-16. My thoughts for the final. Dan, you got any work coming out that you want to promo for the people?
I'm gonna have a breakdown for Buffalo Rumblings tomorrow of the 2-point conversion play and the touchdown play that Indianapolis ran against the Bills this past week. Assuming the camera angle's good, because I don't know what the snow's like, but I think that part of the game we were all set for. So
yeah, there was some good footage there towards the end. The beginning was just a disaster.
Right. Yeah.
All right, man, we'll appreciate it. And that's going to do it for here for me and Dan. You can catch us up at LockedOnBills.com, cover1.net. I'm over at WGR550.com. And as Dan mentioned, over at Buffalo Rumblings. That's going to do it here for our Scouting the Miami Dolphins podcast here at, of course, Locked On Bills.
Hope you're enjoying another great podcast on the Locked On Network. I'm John Ledyard, host of the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, for your year-round look at draft-eligible college prospects. If your team season hasn't gone as expected, don't worry. My co-host Trevor Sikkema and I get together 5 days a week, often with national guests, to talk about the top prospects in the upcoming draft. Be sure to check out Locked On NFL Draft 5 days a week on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for subscribing and listening.
Thanks for listening to the Locked On Podcast Network. Be sure to find this podcast and the latest news on the NFL and NBA by following us on Twitter, at Facebook, at Locked On NFL Net, and Locked On NBA Net.